Today I'm going to be talking about bringing code of conduct and a response team to your open source project. This is going to be a bit different from the keynote that I did earlier today. This is going to be far more how-to and as opposed to big picture as I shared this morning. Yes, this is a topic that I really enjoy talking about, which is a little surprising given that it is code of conduct, which who likes rules anyways? But it is a really tricky topic in open source, and one that it's a vital topic for all open source projects, and one that is very nuanced and challenging and encapsulates some of the most invisible work in open source that is very much needed. And that's really challenging in open source because we value solutions and consensus around them. We value transparency and equitable practices. And so how can we bring all of this work to an open source project? So my name is Angela Jin, and I explored this topic firsthand this past year and then some. It's very much a part of my job. I am the head of programs and contributor experience at Automattic, which is the company behind things like Jetpack, WooCommerce, Tumblr, and they sponsor my work full time, and I spend it with the WordPress open source project. And it is in the WordPress open source project where I first became very familiar with our events code of conduct, and that's where I learned to do this work of incident response. And then I eventually went on to help establish a project-wide code of conduct and a response team as well. And so that is the story I am going to share with you today in the hopes that you also see a path forward for your open source project. And if this feels daunting, let me share this with you. This year, WordPress is celebrating its 20th anniversary, and we are very excited about it, and you can celebrate that with us here. And if you were listening to my intro there, you will have learned that despite being around for 20 years, it was really only this past year that WordPress established a project-wide code of conduct, and that is not for lack of trying. This is really hard work. Because our very first attempt at a code of conduct was pretty successful, where some of our very first event organizers attached a code of conduct to WordCamp San Francisco in 2011 using word for word the code of conduct from the open source bridge. And this led to a pretty established code of conduct for WordPress events, where because we were in person and we could visibly see each other, it was somewhat well agreed upon that a code of conduct would help make our space a little more welcoming and supportive of the diversity we wanted to see. And so this spurred a desire to create a project-wide code of conduct starting in 2013. And then again in 2015, and again in 2017, and then we started some more conversations in 2019. And so this, to me, highlights the immense challenge of establishing a code of conduct and incident response team. Because the WordPress community, we know how to work together to make big, complex things happen. As we are celebrating our 20th anniversary, we power 42% of the internet. We have almost 800 communities around the world in 115 countries. And the latest release, WordPress 6.1, has been fully translated into 71 languages. Our next release comes out, I was about to say at the end of the month, but that's in a few days. The next release is already translated into 65 languages. So why is incident response then so difficult? And so here's what happened. First, there was some resistance to a code of conduct entirely. People felt that the community was plenty nice already, and a code of conduct would simply allow for policing behavior, which we don't like. And then we were worried that just having a code of conduct would imply or make it appear to newcomers that we've had problems in the past, and that's the only reason why we have a code of conduct, because we've had problems that we want to prevent. And then in addition to community members who disagreed with having a code of conduct at all, there were some really big questions that we didn't even know how to begin to answer. Like, who would a code of conduct apply to, and where would it apply? In 2015, one of the volunteers summarized what they felt was the biggest challenge, which is the code of conduct itself, because mainly it is a document that is loaded with emotional elements. And this is typically why documents take a long time to write, and also why they become controversial and are often not adopted. And so all of these blockers were very real for people. And at the same time, there are very good reasons for any community to have a code of conduct and a response team. And so if you attended keynotes this morning, you'll have heard a bit about where I think code of conduct can be really effective. But in very quick summary, a code of conduct establishes the behavior we aspire to and what we absolutely will not tolerate. And this helps to establish how we can expect to engage with others, and for people who are new, especially those who are underrepresented in our community, it can help to increase the safety by letting people know that if they experience something that made them feel uncomfortable or negative in our community, how they are protected. And we hope, of course, that everybody in our community has a great experience, but it would be probably too optimistic to expect that that is always the case. And so a code of conduct can help everyone understand how they can get help when something doesn't go as expected. But even these very good reasons raised further questions, such as how would we even enforce a code of conduct? What kind of system could we create that would also match the levels of transparency we want to see in open source? And for those enforcing a code of conduct, how could we support them through those emotional elements? And so in 2020, as the world changed, my events team had to shift focuses very, very quickly. And as the people on the community events team shifted, one concern that surfaced was that the people who had been doing instant response work were also going on to different focuses. So we were quickly losing the people who could do this kind of work. I started thinking about how we could train people to do this work because historically we had largely done it through excellent oral tradition. And so we needed to create training that would last beyond us. And so it was with this in mind that the WordPress community team started working with our project executive director, Josefa Hayden-Champosi, around rekindling the conversation for a project-wide code of conduct and training for an instant response team. This time, however, building on all of the work that had been done around this topic in past years, we decided to ship a best first version of a code of conduct and welcome feedback instead. And these two measures line up really well with some open source principles. First, we had a need, so we were scratching a personal itch. And then second, we're releasing early and releasing often, or as we like to say, ship and iterate. And these are both open source principles that have worked exceptionally well for WordPress. So for the code of conduct, this is what this looked like. First, Josefa proposed a WordPress contributor handbook, which would include a community code of conduct. Then she began sharing some written pieces for feedback before codifying them. Our code of conduct today borrows very heavily from the Contributor Covenant, which is a code of conduct used by many open source projects out there. And ours is also inspired by Mozilla's code of conduct. And what works really well about this code of conduct is that, just as I've said, it focuses on the behaviors we aspire to and the behaviors that we absolutely will not tolerate, which people generally agree with. And it outlines clearly some possible steps if code of conduct is broken, therefore increasing the transparency around what an incident response team might do. We did change and add a few different elements. What the contributor covenant called our standards, we modified to our expectations, matching some of the language that already exists within the WordPress community. We added a few pieces that we felt were important, such as a note about how we would respond to retaliation towards people who were making reports, and what happens if people influence behavior against code of conduct. We also added interpretation to note that this code of conduct is to be followed in spirit as much as in the letter. And then we noted how the code of conduct could evolve from time to time. In fact, I did this just last week, and I promise I didn't do it just so that I could add it to this talk. It was actually in reading through Open Source 101's Code of Conduct. I really liked this language around statement about socials or supplemental events. And so what I did was I brought this to Slack, did some gut checking with folks, and then I made a proposal and we discussed it there, and then we added it. So Code of Conducts can also be iterated on continually. And so, meanwhile, while drawing on my own experience and seeing what was available in other communities, I started writing instant response training. And I wrote, 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 and it was a lot. And I very intentionally called it incident response training and not code of conduct enforcement, because instant response training is much more reflective of this work. We are a resource to the community. We're not out there monitoring behavior. And I'm really proud of this work because while it is going to continually be iterated on, this training is available to anyone who wants to take it, whether you are a part of the WordPress community or not. And so you can take this, see what you like, and you can also take it and iterate on it as you will. So the training is centered around 4 modules, each filled with a lot of great information, examples, and assessments that help to reinforce the information. First, we have an introduction to the incident response team, what it is not, and why we need one. Then we have an overview of processes and expectations of the incident response team. And in this section, this is where we begin to discuss how incident response does have the potential to be emotionally challenging and how we aim to be supportive and to maintain calm, reflective behaviors. We also talk about confidentiality because the nature of incident response does regularly require confidentiality to best support impacted community members. We also discuss conflicts of interest, some communication best practices, and awareness of your own emotional health, noting that we are not mental health professionals. This section focuses more about building awareness around how difficult this work can be and how it is okay to step away as you need. The third module covers taking incident reports, and the fourth is responding to incident reports. And those last 2 are definitely like the meatiest pieces of incident response. And for those 2, I was inspired by some of the training I took to volunteer for Crisis Text Line, where all of those are highly emotionally charged conversations. They're really difficult. And what they did really well was to distill that into some core steps and then to repeat that throughout the training, because when you are in a high stress moment, the best training will give you some actionable tools and steps that you can more easily recall. And so that's what I did for modules 3 and 4, and this is what that looks like. So module 3 is for anyone who might be taking or submitting incident reports. This could be incident response team members, but it could also be event organizers or someone who just wants to help other people. And so we distilled this into 5 steps. The first step is to maintain a calm attitude. We're emphasizing the importance of being calm and supportive and empathetic presence to help keep situations grounded and possible measures to take towards that. Then we listen for understanding, and this is about providing a safe space for the community member to share what happened. The associated skill that we introduce here is active listening. Then we identify next steps. This step focuses on thinking through what steps we might be able to take, and just as important, making sure that the community member understands what options are available to them. Then we explore the situation. Here we are asking for questions to gather as much information as possible. And in the training, we introduce the skill of asking open-ended questions as opposed to leading questions. And then finally, we complete and submit an incident report. This is more of an important administrative step, but of course, very important. And we reiterate the next steps to help the community member understand where they can go for more information, what they can expect to happen at this point. And the module, this chapter includes an example incident report so that learners can get a better sense for what that might look like. And then the fourth and most content-heavy module is how to respond to incident reports. And this module is heavily geared towards the incident response team and anybody who is preparing to respond to an incident report. But having it here helps everyone see what steps we are likely to take. And again, we have 5 steps. So first, we review the incident report. We read the report and assess it against the code of conduct. And so in this section, we talk about the scope of code of conduct and where it applies. And in this step, we determine what actions we might want to take. Then we inform the affected parties. We begin notifying involved people and letting them know what steps we might want to take, taking into consideration confidentiality, and if there isn't an immediate a safety threat of some kind, we always aim for consent before moving forward with our proposed steps. In this section, we examine tone of voice. We're always aiming for friendly, supportive, calm, no matter who we are speaking with. And if the incident response team member is struggling to maintain that calm, what kind of steps they might be able to take in that situation. And then we gather additional information. This is the most time-intensive step. This is where we are preparing for and conducting interviews, and generally building our understanding of what happened. And this is where we discuss establishing credibility. We talk about some interview myths and some interview best practices as well. I really like this section because I like to remind everyone that this is not a crime drama. There's no like gotcha moments. There's no, it is often, it can be very ambiguous what happens sometimes, and so our role is to just absorb as much information as possible so that we can put together our best understanding of what happened. And then we're going to determine next steps and a response plan. Based off of what we learn, we create a response plan, and we once again notify the people who are involved. And in the training, we share some anonymized history here of past incident reports and response plans. And then last but not least, we close the incident report. Again, an important administrative step, but we're making sure that everything is wrapped up as nicely as possible and preparing for that annual anonymized reporting. Ideally, documentation is something that happens throughout all of these processes, so we do start this module with documentation best practices, but this step helps to make sure that we do wrap everything up nicely. And so it is a very large course, and not everyone is going to want to take it. I don't know that code of conduct and incident response is an appealing topic to all community members. However, the point of making it public is so that if anyone is curious, they can know more about our best practices, what we believe to be the right response, what steps we do take. And I also really like making it public because, as I said earlier, incident response work is some of the most invisible work. We can't exactly just tell everyone like, hey, we helped this person in this way, because it does need confidentiality around it. But what we can share are the steps that we are going to take in different situations in this way. And so this training has gone through a number of iterations already. I first asked a number of contributors who had experience working on incident reports to read through it. Then we worked with an instructional designer to refine the assessments and adjust some of the flow of the content. Then we did a call for volunteers who had never done this work before, but were familiar with our events and our community to go through it. And in all cases, feedback was received, and it was requested, received, and incorporated, which lines up with another open source principle, because with many eyes, all bugs are shallow. And so that is why the training continues to be iterated on. And so with the training in place, we began to move forward with creating the actual incident response team itself. And this is where I started to really reiterate loudly that this team was not about moderating behavior. This team was going to be a resource to the community. And while most calls for volunteers are very open to anyone in the WordPress community, because of the nature of this group, we did decide that it was a more specialized approach was necessary. And so what we did instead was to ask for nominations to the team. And we looked for people who had strong reputations in the community, people who we knew would be nice and calm in difficult situations, people who would be able to maintain confidentiality, things like that. And I also did a good amount of outreach to ensure good diversity on this team, not just race and gender, but also I wanted diversity that would reflect our global community. So of our 18 people, we do have a nice split across different regions, the APAC, EMEA, and Americas regions. And we also have a good number of languages represented as well. I think we have at least 7 non-English languages spoken on that team. And so each person was vetted and asked to commit to the team for a full year. And depending on the volume of incident reports, they could expect to contribute 2 to 20 hours a month. And we also made it a requirement that to join the incident response team, they would have to complete that online cohort or online training and participate in a synchronous cohort. And so this is what the cohort looked like. We came together 6 times over the course of 2 months, and we offered it twice a day to cover our very wide spread of time zones. In between weeks, participants were asked to complete specific modules, and they would have the opportunity to discuss with other cohort members what they had learned, or they could participate in office hours as well. We included 2 sessions on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. We hired an external consultant to do that work with us, and she prioritized giving us some shared language around DEIB and a better understanding of how we could and should incorporate DEIB into incident response work. And then the synchronous sessions focused on, we did some quick recapping of the key takeaways, but then we focused on discussion and exercises. And those exercises in particular were key, and they were honestly kind of fun. We covered things like asking open-ended questions, taking instant reports, and interviewing witnesses. The exercises were largely role play, and while real situations are difficult and emotional and stressful, in our cohort, when we were doing role play, we encouraged people, we paired them up and encouraged people to be the best actor they could be, and like be that angry community member, be that really upset community member, and so that the person practicing the skill would kind of get that situation as much as possible. And so it was, beyond building some very strong camaraderie in that group, we gave people a safe place to practice those skills as well. And then when we finished the course, we announced it to the community, and we shared how people could reach us and how we could help them as well. And so that is how we welcomed a project-wide code of conduct and built an instant response team in the WordPress community. What is on my mind next are a few things. First, I really want to let everyone know that we have a code of conduct, that this resource is available to them. And then I also really want to work with our existing team right now and help them grow a stronger sense of community within that group, because they are going to be working together so much. I'm exploring some ongoing training opportunities, things like workshops on active listening or conflict de-escalation and advanced interview techniques. And then I am really hoping that this group will also be the ones to welcome new instant response team members so that the team can continue to grow and change over the coming years. And so that is the story. Thank you so much for being here.